Mary Beth Carr.
Okay, so I just want to know, did we give you the full St. Louis experience? Let's go Blues! I even wore blue today too, just to make it happen. I promise I won't start singing Gloria, and I hope everybody knows Gloria is not really the St. Louis thing. I believe it's Philadelphia, but as usual, we just stole it and we're going with it. Okay, so here we are, day 2 at the end. Our first speaker, Sarah Bitner, is the Forensic Biology Manager and Technical Leader of the Allegheny County Office of the Medical Examiner's Office in Pittsburgh, PA. They have the Penguins. They are not in the Stanley Cup this year. Just want to make it clear. I'm a hockey girl, so, Sarah has a bachelor's and a master's degree from Duquesne University Forensic Science and Law program. She is published and holds an American Board of Criminalistics diplomat certificate in molecular biology, along with a Green Belt and Lean Six Sigma. Please welcome Ms. Bitner as she speaks on technology to facilitate Brady and Giglio disclosures.
Thank you very much. As was mentioned, I'm from the Allegheny County Office of the Medical Examiner. It's a small laboratory associated with the Medical Examiner's Office that's located in southwestern Pennsylvania, and this jurisdiction includes the city of Pittsburgh. We serve a population of 1.2 million people, just to give you an idea of the size of the area, with 137 submitting agencies, which obviously are a lot of submitting agencies for such a small area, which is about 745 square miles. Our submitting agencies include the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office, the Allegheny County Public Defender's Office, and the United States Attorney's Office. And because you can never have someone from Pittsburgh that doesn't want to show off our skyline, here is Pittsburgh, and we have a few sports teams, which may not have made it quite as far as a few other sports teams, but we've made it there before. So what I'll be talking about today will be mandatory disclosures that deal mainly with Brady and Giglio, which were kind of mentioned a few times in other talks today. It's not something that we were really aware of in our office until about 2015, when someone from a federal agency joined our staff. And he started asking questions about our Giglio disclosures. Do we have forms? Is there anything he has to complete? And when he asked that, we said, huh? We had no idea what he was talking about. So we started on the path of educating ourselves to try and figure out what exactly he was talking about and what our responsibilities were. In addition to Giglio, we also have started putting elements into our process to facilitate disclosure for any Brady concerns associated with our quality management system. And we've also noticed a sharp increase in the number of discovery requests that we have received within our laboratory in the last few years. Specifically in DNA, we've had a doubling in 2019 from the requests from the previous year in 2018, which was even an increase from the previous year. You'll notice I'm not mentioning any numbers. That is because I'll explain a little bit later. To give an idea of some of the reports and submissions that we have, again, for the size of our laboratory, total submissions in 2018 were 10,181 submissions. This is for all of our disciplines. We have trace, latent prints, toxicology, environmental, forensic biology, drug chemistry, and a mobile unit. Of those submissions, 597 were specific for DNA and 4,521 for toxicology, which are the two sections that get the most reports associated with mandatory disclosure requests. One thing that's really important to note, which is why we started looking to utilize technology to be able to help us with this issue, was that we have no dedicated staff that can help us with a response to any mandatory disclosures. Because of the sensitive nature associated with Giglio, everything has to be handled by our management to be able to provide the information, which includes a manual review of paper copies from personnel files. So the management that could possibly be involved in this process starts with the Director of Laboratory Operations, which it's not captured here, but he actually wears two hats. In addition to his level as Director of Laboratory Operations, he also wears the title of Manager Administration, which is the equivalent of the Deputy Director for our Office of the Medical Examiner. In addition to him, the laboratory managers, myself as the manager and DNA technical leader, the laboratory manager of drug chemistry, environmental, and trace, the laboratory manager of firearms and latent prints, and the lab manager of toxicology would also be responsive to these requests. From the morgue side of our operations, because we do get the requests for both sides, we have two individuals that are able to respond to these requests, the director of morgue operations and the manager of morgue operations. The requests of the information can come from a large number, or the gathering of the information can come from a large number of sources within our laboratory, anywhere from paper files, which is where a lot of the personnel information is located at, to on-base, which is where our HR files are for our organization-wide, meaning county-wide HR files. SharePoint, where we save a lot of instrument-specific information as well as other files specific to each section. Qualtrics, which is our records management system, our laboratory information management system, and our medical examiner information management system, which is utilizing the BEAST, so both LIMS and MIMS, and MIDIO, where we store our photographs and perform annotations. So some background information on mandatory disclosure, because there might be varying levels of knowledge on this topic. Like I said, we had someone come into our laboratory and say, how do we report this? And we had no idea what he was even talking about. So just wanted to provide some information on exactly what it means. The two major cases that are associated with this are Brady v. Maryland and Giglio v. the United States. Prior to any Giglio requests that we received, if you notice in the previous slides, I noted the concerns of the various areas we could be pulling information, and that I also mentioned our HR information. Prior to the receipt of these Giglio requests in 2018, we were only concerned with technical documents. We received a discovery request so that the prosecution could turn that over to the defense. We copied the case record, we went to the case file, we grabbed some electronic data, and we were done. It was time consuming, but it wasn't so bad. Once we started to get the Giglio requests, it changed our burden and started causing us to look at the various other sources. So, Brady, what is the case? The case itself is an incident where started with two separate trials of two individuals that were accused of committing homicide. The two individuals were John Brady and Don Boblet. They were accused of killing William Brooks. They were charged with two separate trials, and in those trials, for the trial of Don Boblet, he confessed and had a written statement to his confession to committing the homicide. John Brady, however, said that the intent when the crime occurred was to just steal a car and that the homicide was accidental. What they decided was that after he was found guilty, they obviously appealed, and when it was found that this written confession existed but was not turned over to the defense of John Brady, that it could have changed the outcome of the trial. The change to the outcome of the trial, however, would not have changed his guilty or not guilty. It only would have changed his sentencing. So this is the case that established that prosecution must turn over all exculpatory evidence, which exculpatory would be anything that clears someone or something of guilt or blame in a trial. With Brady, the prosecution has what's referred to as an affirmative obligation to transmit information on their case to the defense. This transfers to the forensic service provider. We do this quite often without even really thinking about it as something that you're doing associated with a Brady violation or a potential Brady violation. As part of our risk assessment, we determine who it is that we need to communicate to whenever we have an issue, a non-compliance, an issue with an instrument, a problem with the reagent. So we're not necessarily doing this independently of our normal processes. It is just providing the information that we typically do with our customer and hasn't added any extra burden to our agency. A few other things that were decided in this court trial would be that anything that needs to be turned over is anything that is considered material. The problem with this statement is that there was no real definition of what material was, which has caused us to reevaluate exactly what it is that we do and do not turn over, because the definition of material is then decided by the court specific to that case. So if you do have a Brady violation that occurs on the part of the prosecution, it doesn't matter if it's in good or bad faith. Did they do it on purpose? Were they hiding some piece of information so that someone could be convicted? Or did they just make a mistake? Regardless of either of those situations, it does not matter. It is still considered a violation of constitutional due process, and it can result in a conviction being overturned or a lessening of a sentence for the individual. In addition, prosecutors can be disciplined for their involvement in a Brady violation. Giglio is the one that's more likely that people may or may not have heard of. In this case, John Giglio was convicted of writing forged checks, and in his trial, the key witness, his partner, co-conspirator, whose name was Taliento, was offered protection from prosecution in exchange for his testimony against Giglio. What's really important in this case is that the deal was actually made by the attorney who was handling the grand jury trial prior to this even going to court for a regular trial. Regardless, the attorney who conducted the regular trial was found to be in violation. The court decision, once it was appealed, found that the prosecution's failure to inform the jury that the witness had been promised something in exchange for his information was a failure on the duty of the prosecution, and it could have changed the outcome, which is why it needed to be reported. It changed his credibility as a witness. This extends the Brady requirements beyond just providing of information that is written, that is documented, and extends to the credibility of witnesses, any government witnesses, especially ones that are employed by the government. An added benefit to this case is that they actually did define what material was, and it was stated to be a reasonable probability that if the evidence had been disclosed to the defense, the outcome of the trial would have been different. It is helpful to have this definition. However, we have still, as we are educating ourselves at the Allegheny County Medical Examiner's Office, are pursuing the idea of providing as much information as we possibly can. And to give an example of why the definition of material requires someone with more training, knowledge, and experience to be able to determine what constitutes material, there is another case where Giglio was utilized as an appeal to determine whether or not the trial could be overturned. And that case is United States v. Bagley. And in that instance, the individual was convicted of violating federal firearms and drug laws based on the testimony of two undercover security guards who assisted the ATF in an undercover investigation of that individual. In that investigation, the government didn't disclose at the time of the trial that they were contracted with the government. However, the judge in that case said that this information was not material because it did not discredit them as witnesses, because they were not paid to testify. They were not given anything in exchange for what they said on the stand. They were paid in their jobs as undercover agents. So there are a lot of things that could potentially impact your credibility as a witness, things that in gathering the information and why that definition of material is important and should be left to individuals that have more training, knowledge, and experience. Some of the areas you might want to consider when handing information over for a Giglio request include false reports. This one's very obvious because when we think about reports, of course we issue reports all the time, and if someone lied in the information that they were putting in a technical report, of course we would report that. But these aren't the only reports we do on a daily basis. We fill out timesheets. We do electronic reports when we do chain of custody. We do electronic reports when we access our various areas in the laboratory. Did somebody alter a chain of custody? Did somebody share their security card with somebody else in the office to help make their movement around the office a little bit easier? These might not be malicious in nature, but it doesn't have to be. It just shows a willingness to circumvent rules and laws to your own benefit. Any documented indications of bias, racial, religious, personal, these have to be substantiated HR claims. They can't be just something that was reported and never found to be true. As well as any social media postings that you're aware of that could be indicative of this information. Handling or loss of evidence or property could also be an issue, and it's important to differentiate here between loss of evidence that leads to a corrective action, but also consider mishandling of property as it pertains to some sort of disciplinary issue. An example that may or may not be a true scenario would be an individual who could be driving a vehicle with only 1 foot inside the car and crashed it into a wall, thus totaling the vehicle. That might need to be reported because it indicates a mishandling of property. Any promises, offers, or inducements that may have been made by the prosecution or law enforcement to the individual. Any secondary employment. If this is information that you document, hand it over. While it might not seem to be material to you, you don't know all of the details of the trial, the people that are associated with it that could cause some sort of bias on the part of the person, or perceived bias on the part of the person who's testifying. Any excessive force incidents in the person's background, criminal convictions or charges, documented and substantiated claims of sexual and racial harassment. If you have any financial disclosures that they have performed, if there is any inappropriate access to government data. Inappropriate access would be someone going into LIMS to look up the toxicology report on the blood alcohol analysis for their cousin who was pulled over for DUI just last week. It's an inappropriate access and abuse of power. And then other sustained actions that clearly reflect on credibility. An example of other sustained actions that might not fall into these other areas might be an individual utilizing local resources to develop a business resource that they are then going to try and sell by using county time or federal time or state time to be able to develop it and then use it to generate their own business. There are many challenges to the mandatory disclosure as we perceive them once we started educating ourselves and reaching out to our United States Attorney's Office. Some of the issues that we are trying to deal with and mitigate by utilizing our technology in our office are the time constraints that are especially coupled with the management schedules that we have and duties. This is a double-edged sword. We have very few people that can do it. If you look at the organizational charts that I showed earlier, saying that we only have a small handful that can pull the information, and all of those individuals wear multiple hats. Each of the managers that don't do casework have 2 or 3 sections. The managers that have a single section still do casework. For the morgue side, they have almost as many employees as the laboratory side, but there's only 2 of them. So there are limited resources to be able to turn this over in a timely manner. However, because of the personnel concerns, it has to be limited to specific individuals to do it. One of the challenges is how to ensure all discovery and court order documentation contain any material documentation. Again, that idea of what is the definition of material? How do we determine what we should and should not be turning over? How to ensure records are consistent between requests and agencies. One of the things, like I said, is that we have the management either take care of or quarterback all discovery requests we get. Regardless of that effort, we still have 2 current open non-compliances of information being identified as missing, either by the prosecution or defense, because the discovery requests aren't treated the same by all of the managers that are providing information. How the record is sent. Are we burning it to a disk? Are we putting it on a jump drive? Are we doing a file drop? Is it something that's available electronically? And then how can we monitor the process efficiency? The turnaround time, obviously we want to make sure that we can give estimates to the court that are reasonable and reliable so that they know when they can expect this information. The number of requests, as well as the outcome of determination for materialness. So there are lists of the various records for disclosure, but because I'm long-winded, I'm getting really close to my time. So I will just go through those. The tools we have available to us are Laboratory Records Management System, which is an office-owned process, our Information Management System, both for the laboratory and the medical examiner's office, and our County Records Management System. Two of these we have more control of, and those are the ones we decided to focus on for our efforts. Some of the things that we wanted to do were to create unifying fields so that we could pull automated reports from our resources that we have available to us. Reporting functions, we wanted to utilize those in the software packages we have to be able to automate and standardize what we're pulling out of those resources, and then figure out the best way to export or access this information to our customers. Within Qualtrics, which is the software that we have the most control over within our laboratory, because we have a team of 3 individuals that creates all of our workflows in-house. We decided to create custom fields that crossed over between what we require for our laboratory information management system as well as what is entered into Qualtrics. And you can see how it captures the mandatory disclosure as a coding field so that when we generate our reports by entering it into multiple workflows, we are able to generate our reports and put that information into various softwares at this time, such as Excel or some other file that we are able to pull it for the use of reporting to our reporting agencies. So some of the future considerations that we have to worry about now that we have created these custom fields and we're able to generate our reports is that we want to figure out a way to expedite the court fulfillment by giving some sort of outside access specific to the attorneys that are pulling this information. We also want to be able to gather the information from one custom report, which would require cross-workflow reporting by our records management system provider, so that instead of pulling multiple reports and combining them manually, removing an additional manual step, and issuing one report or allowing them to access it through the cloud-based system that we utilize. Finally, we want to ensure some way of ensuring disclosure of technical records, meeting Pennsylvania State Rule 574 by providing curriculum vitae, authorization letters, and certifications. And finally, we need to figure out some method for documentation and maintenance of additional disclosures, specifically with Jenks v. United States.